invited very special voice to be able to put it not only in the larger landscape of global crisis, which we have done, but also within the specific moment that we're living in the US. And there are three very clear references. This Thursday, the US dropped the biggest bomb after the nuclear bombs that they had done in their history in Afghanistan. There is, as we have been talking about, a student strike in Puerto Rico, and there is a wave of resistance and struggle there. And as U.S. Latinos, because Puerto Ricans, we're also U.S. Latinos, no? We're facing a very difficult, harsh moment. And one of the best voices to speak about such issues is Juan Gonzalez. So Juan has a very long history, even though he's young. So I'm going to read some notes about Juan. Juan Gonzalez was born in Ponce, Puerto Rico, and we people from Ponce are very localists. And raised in East Harlem and Brooklyn. As an undergraduate student at Columbia University, he was active in the anti-Vietnam War movement and played a leading role in the protests that shut down the college in the spring of 1968 as one of 3 strike central representatives on the strike coordinating committee. He was a member of Student for Democratic Society and a founding member of the New York City branch of the Young Lords organization that rightfully so is getting the recognition that it deserves. Serving on its first central committee as its Minister of Education. In 1981, he was elected as the first president of the National Congress for Puerto Rican Rights, and this is where the context in which I actually met Juan. He had a brilliant career as an investigative print journalist since the late 1970s until last year when he retired after 30 years of service at the New York Daily News. In 1998, Gonzalez won his first George Polk Award for unflinching investigative reporting. He's also former president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. In addition, he has been named by Hispanic Business Magazine as one of America's most influential Hispanics, as well as earning a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Hispanic Academy of Media, Art, and Sciences. Juan has written 3 books: Fallout, The Environmental Consequences of the World Trade Center Collapse, Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America, for where he also made a film, and Roll Down Your Window, Stories of a Forgotten America. Juan is also co-author with Joseph Torres of News for All the People, The Epic Story of Race and the American Media, History of the American Media with special focus on media outlets owned and controlled by people of color and how they were suppressed, sometimes violently, by mainstream political, corporate, and media leaders. He's presently professor of journalism at Rutgers University and co-host of Democracy Now!, a syndicated radio and television show that is regarded as one of the best in the U.S., broadcasting national and international news and analysis from a critical perspective. Please welcome Brother Juan Gonzalez.
Thank you to my old friend and compañero de lucha, Agustin, and to the other organizers of this event for inviting me to be among such a distinguished group of scholars from both Puerto Rico and the United States in hopes of trying to engage in a deeper dialogue, spread a broader understanding and perhaps a more accurate understanding of the terrible economic, financial, and political crisis that has befallen the island and the people of Puerto Rico. I haven't been able to be at the conference today because, as I told a couple of people, my My youngest daughter is a senior in high school, and she's going through the whole college thing, and she got admitted to UMass and to the honors college here. And I told her, I said, Gabriela, I'm coming up to here to speak. Why don't you come with me and do the tour? Because today is UMass Day here. So I finally convinced her, and she's trying to decide between her choices. And so we spent most of the day touring the campus and getting a better understanding of what's going on here at UMass. I've been asked to share some thoughts on how the crisis relates to the broader questions of the global crisis that so many nations and people are facing, the Trump presidency and US policies toward Latin America. Needless to say, that's a complex topic, one that requires hard work to fully understand, and I approach it as neither an expert in economics nor political science. I have, of course, been studying closely for nearly 50 years now the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States as a journalist, as a researcher and chronicler of Latino history, as a longtime activist in the Puerto Rican communities of the United States, and as someone who was born on that incredibly beautiful island, still has family there, and cares deeply about what happens to my homeland. Excuse me if some of what I say here might be a little repetitious of what's been said earlier, but when the crisis broke to the world back in June of 2015, shortly afterwards I was asked at NYU to give a presentation on my initial take on it. So I'm borrowing some from that presentation, but of course lots of things have changed since October of 2015. So I've had to try to update it, as well as to deal with the broader issue that I've been asked to talk about. So I followed the crisis in Puerto Rico on an almost daily basis until roughly June of 2016, when the Promesa, when the debate in Congress happened and the Promesa board was established. And since then, I've sort of been forced off in another direction because I did, as Agustin said, retire from the Daily News and then began finishing a new book that I think has a lot of relationship to what you're discussing here. It's a book looking at the enormous mass movements that have developed across the United States, at the urban popular movements that are attempting to beat back the neoliberal policies that have ruled urban America for the past 40, 50 years now. So I've been sort of deeply immersed in what's going on in Seattle with Ed Murray, in Minneapolis with Betsy Hodges, in New York with Bill de Blasio, in Boston with Martin Walsh, in Newark with Ras Baraka, and in Jackson, Chakra Lumumba before he passed away, in Philadelphia, and a bunch of other cities, trying to understand the fight back against neoliberalism that is really extremely vibrant. It's not understood as a movement that is actually a worldwide movement. If you look at what's going on in Barcelona or Paris or London, there's all of these popular movements that have suddenly become the new hope of political change, are these urban struggles. And so that's what I've been spending most of my time, because the book has to be out by September, so I'm doing the final copy editing on it right now. So how did this whole situation with Puerto Rico develop? The average American only became aware of the crisis in June of 2015, when the Wall Street financial experts have known for years that the day of reckoning was coming. Still, corporate America was stunned when Garcia Padilla announced in the New York Times interview on June 29th and in a televised address to the people of Puerto Rico that same evening that the annual debt service was no longer payable. He thus publicly acknowledged his government was on the verge of the biggest debt default and bankruptcy in the history of American municipal bonds, far bigger than what happened in Orange County decades ago or in Detroit more recently. In the year after Garcia Padilla's announcement, Puerto Rico received more attention in the US media and among Washington politicians than at any time in the island's modern history. The almost daily coverage surpassed even the last media juggernaut some 15 years previously, when massive civil disobedience protests forced the end of the US Navy's bombing practice on the island of Vieques. In fact, Puerto Rican activists on both the left and the right immediately jumped on the crisis to point to and demand a resolution of the island's status question. Of course, no one in his or her right mind believes the status issue will be resolved anytime soon. Certainly not in a few months, as the crisis was unfolding, or in the next few years, and possibly not for decades more. But to ignore how colonialism has shaped the current crisis would be a distortion of reality and damage efforts to devise any fundamental solutions. I believe a lasting solution now is closer, precisely because all sides recognize that the current condition cannot continue. For those of us searching for ways to concretely help the vast majority of those affected by the crisis, the 99% of Puerto Ricans, as opposed to the 1% of the island's elite who are tied to the interests of American banks and multinationals, it's not sufficient to simply cry colonialism, to insist that nothing can be done until the status issue is resolved. We need to dig deep to analyze how US domination of Puerto Rico evolved over the past 20 or 30 years, how changes in the world capitalist economy have been manifested in our own homeland. It is time we acknowledge that globalization has rendered historic concepts of national independence almost meaningless. You no longer need foreign armies to control the population when you can read everyone's mail, tap everyone's phone, empty a country's coffers, and paralyze its economy from afar through satellites, instant wire transfers, intercepts of communication junctures, and simple cancellation of bank credit lines. We need more creative and flexible tactics to defend small nations from foreign domination, new ways to assert national sovereignty in an increasingly interdependent world. Some of us began to describe Puerto Rico as America's Greece. Could the island's economic collapse and financial crisis threaten the larger American economy of which it is an integral part? Most financial experts immediately scoffed and dismissed the notion. But then most of them discounted the possibility that the subprime mortgage crisis could spark a worldwide recession. The skeptics this time included some prominent liberals, such as Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman, who raised the outlandish idea a few months after the crisis began in one of his columns in the New York Times, when Krugman, that Puerto Rico was simply a victim of geography. Writing in the Times, Krugman said, quote, "Puerto Rico may, to an important extent, just suffer from being a slightly hard-to-reach island in a time when corporations place a high premium on easy, just-in-time shipments." In many ways, Puerto Rico is worse than Greece because it has even less ability to act independently than that depression-racked nation. The normal refrain you hear in most media accounts is that Puerto Rico cannot resort to the normal protections of federal Chapter 9 bankruptcy because federal law only permits cities or public corporations within states to use Chapter 9, and since the island is not an independent country, it obviously can't go to the International Monetary Fund to seek some kind of a financial bailout the IMF is infamous for concocting. The island is in this atypical netherworld, they say. But very few go on one step further and ask, why is that? If it is neither a state nor an independent nation, what exactly is Puerto Rico? And why has such an important issue, like what happens when a government can't pay its debts, fallen through the cracks when it comes to Puerto Rico? The answer, as we all know, and as this conference is clearly aware, is colonialism. The answer is Congress can make any laws it wants when it comes to Puerto Rico. And in the case of bankruptcy, it did just that. The battle to create the Promesa Board has obviously settled this question once and for all. as all of the branches of the federal government, the Congress, the Supreme Court, and the White House, all in the process of the months leading up to the creation of the Promesa Board, all agreed for the first time that Puerto Rico has never had sovereignty, that the free associated state never existed. They all reaffirmed to the world that the U.S. still has a colonial possession. What better example could there be of that than a Promesa Board of people who mostly live in the United States, making governing decisions from New York City over the lives of Puerto Rico's 3.5 million people. Now, even when you consider the DC Control Board, which was used as a model, supposedly, for the Promesa Control Board, the DC Control Board created, I think it was in 1995. It was under a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, and under a Republican Congress, the Newt Gingrich Congress, when DC was put into receivership. They established a control board of 5 members, all appointed by the president. So Newt Gingrich and the Republican majority gave the president the power to name all 5 members in consultation with the Congress, but the president had the full power. The Puerto Rico Control Board ended up being 7 people named by the president, but 4 of them had to be from a list supplied by Republicans. So this Republican Congress did not give President Obama anywhere near the power to decide the composition of the board that they gave that the Republicans of 1995 gave to Bill Clinton. In addition, in the DC Control Board, the president got to name the chair. In the Puerto Rico Control Board, the majority of 4 Republicans got to name the chair. So it was a complete emasculation of the power of the president. In the DC Control Board, all 5 members had to be residents of the District of Columbia. In the Puerto Rico Control Board, the majority didn't have to be residents of Puerto Rico. So even in the creation of a control board, the level of complete impunity and audacity and arrogance of this Congress vis-a-vis citizens in trouble is clearly just in the creation of the structure. The other thing, which I think is more relevant, and I'll get into this a little later, is that Congress ended up absorbing all of the pension liabilities of the District of Columbia. I think it was something like $2 to $3 billion in pension liabilities that the District of Columbia could not pay. Congress incorporated the employees of the District of Columbia into the federal government's pension fund. So there was a clear effort, a recognition on the part of Congress that you were not only going to establish a control board, you were going to have to assume some responsibility over fixing the financial problem that the district found itself in. Here, there's perhaps more legal argument to the fact that this debt ultimately is a debt that the federal government will have to deal with, not just that Puerto Rico will have to deal with. And I'm sure that there are lots of people who don't want to have that heard in court, but it would take a long time. Anyway, the skeptics kept saying that contagion from the possible bankruptcy of Puerto Rico would not affect the rest of the American economy. I want to quote to you from one of these market analysts just a few weeks ago, talking about the situation with what's happened most recently with the Promesa Board, which is the board's decision that not only did the government of Puerto Rico did not provide a sufficient budget that would meet the debt problems, the immediate debt problems of the island, but that the creditors could not expect to get paid as much. So this is from one of these, it's called alpha.com. On March 11th, a new plan was delivered and mystifyingly approved by the board, and it is a disaster for bondholders. All it speaks to is how to increase cash flow and cut expense, which are fine and aims to satisfy the GO bondholders, which is also good. However, all the other creditors, the rest, are left out in the cold, having to absorb a 70% cram down. 70% cram down. So the Promesa board, appointed by the US government, has now admitted just a few weeks ago that it is impossible to pay all this debt, and that a big section of the creditors are going to get 25 to 30 cents on the dollar for the debt that is owed to them. That had an immediate impact on the municipal bond market, and in fact, the bond insurers, AMBEC, MBIA, Assured Guarantee, within hours of this announcement, the price of their stocks started to plummet because they are insuring these bonds. And if now even the control board says there's no way to pay all this money back, all these bondholders are going to have to take a big loss, these insurers are going to have to pay. AMBEC, the last time I looked, AMBEC insured $9 billion in Puerto Rico bonds. And if the control board is saying there's no way Puerto Rico is going to be able to pay this back, that means AMBEC has to pay it. You know, AMBEC has to pay because a lot of the bonds are, not all the bonds, but a lot of the bonds are insured. So, so there's going to be a ripple effect if what the control board decided a few weeks ago, and now on May 1, unless they extend the cooling off period, all of these bondholders are going to go into court. There's going to be so many lawsuits, and there's going to be such a mess to deal with this Puerto Rico bond situation and it's going to have a big impact on the markets because there's only 4 or 5 of these insuring companies that insure all the municipal bonds in the United States. So I continue to believe that there is a potential for contagion in the entire municipal bond market if the Puerto Rico situation is not resolved, and I believe the financial community knows that. And it's hard, just because it's gotten off the front pages since the Promesa board was established doesn't mean the problem has been resolved. You all heard about the PREPA. PREPA is supposed to cut its own deal. The electric company is supposed to cut its own deal with the government. They were going to take about 11%, 15% haircut, but Puerto Rico was going to pay them back the rest of their money. Well, look what this alpha analyst says about that. 2 years ago, when PREPA ran into fiscal trouble, a restructuring support agreement was forged. Creditors were only forced to take a $972 million haircut, just under 11% of the $9 billion they were owed in PREPA bonds. The reason for this relatively small slice is because the 2017-2020 fiscal plan relied on an estimate of $7 billion being available for debt service. That the government was saying there would be about $7 billion over the next 3 or 4 years to be able to pay the PREPA bond holders. Well, now the Promesa board comes along, looks at all the books, and says, no, there's not going to be $7 billion available. There's going to be $2.8 billion available. That's it for PREPA. That means all that deal that PREPA supposedly had for all the bondholders just fell apart in the last few weeks, and they're losing huge amounts of money in their debts. So this is the problem that the bond market of the United States is facing, and that's why I continue to believe, even though I'm not an economist, I'll say that up front, I'm only a journalist who looks at numbers and tries to figure things out, that there's still enormous potential for the unresolved financial crisis of Puerto Rico to spread to the entire municipal bond market of the United States. Now, the bond issue and the bond crisis is part of what, as we've analyzed the nature of colonialism in Puerto Rico, how it's changed. Because it used to be resource extraction, then it was industrialization and cheap labor. But since the 1980s, really, and then especially exploding after the 1990s, the main form of exploitation of Puerto Rico, it seems to me, has been this financial. It's been the ability to continue to lend money even when you knew that structurally, even though all the bankers and all the Wall Street people knew structurally there was no way that this money could be paid back, but this new approach, this neoliberal approach of basically throwing debt at governments and then trying to scoop up the collateral when they couldn't pay, has basically, when the bills came due, the bankers say, well, we're just going to have to tighten your belts. You're just going to have to reduce spending because you still have to pay us first. And if it's a sovereign debt, then you have to pay us back. But that is the nature of the type of colonial domination that has occurred in Puerto Rico, and that's why the debt is so great. And it's a debt that I don't think that it's yet been determined how big the debt is, because there's all of these instruments that they created, this capital appreciation bonds. I'm sure some of the folks who have been going into this, one example, 2007, there was I think it was a $700,000 capital appreciation bond that Puerto Rico floated. And it had to pay no interest and no principal for 50 years. You borrowed money, what's that, $700,000, right? You borrowed money, and you have, for 50 years, you have a debt that you pay no interest and no principal, but the interest accumulates. At the end of 50 years, you owe $1 billion, right? And because I think it was like 5.5% interest or whatever the interest rate was. So this is a payday loan. This is a payday loan. The Wall Street was giving Puerto Rico payday loans, right? Don't pay us anything back. Just let the interest accumulate, because after all, you got to pay us back. You have to pay us back. And your own constitution says you got to pay, especially the GEO debt back. So it was a financial scam going on to make money off of Puerto Rico, all under the theory that the island would never go bankrupt, right? So this is what is now facing the financial community of the United States. So how do progressives and all people of goodwill who are concerned about Puerto Rico's future maneuver during this difficult time? How do we figure out what needs to be done? More importantly, what could be done, given the extreme conservative administration in Washington and the deep party divisions in Puerto Rico? Well, I believe that there's four basic principles that should operate in whatever solutions are devised. First, there's a need to disseminate a clear narrative on the roots of the crisis and colonialism, not in Puerto Ricans being inept, lazy, or seeking a handout. The battle over the narrative is crucial. We talk about the narrative in history. The narrative right now, who's at fault? How did this come about? There has to be a battle over control of the narrative. Second is that we should unite with all those who say that if Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, they must be treated in equal fashion when it comes to all federal grants, Medicaid, Medicare, bankruptcy laws, and that includes ending the discriminatory requirements of the Jones Act shipping laws, and that clearly the threat of Puerto Rico defaulting was what forced the government to actually not only create an oversight board, but also give that oversight board the power to put into effect a Chapter 9-like process. They're not calling it Chapter 9, but it's a Chapter 9-like process, which is what is about to occur on May 1, unless there is a temporary continued cooling off period. And third, we should oppose debt restructuring that seeks greater austerity, lower wages or working conditions on the island. We've heard about all the 300 schools being closed, $300 million cuts, furloughs, furloughs for the teachers and furloughs for the government workers, because the problem is, and this is, and no less an authority than Joseph Stiglitz talks about this, if the only way out of the crisis is through economic growth, how do you get economic growth if you end up creating more and more economic dislocation among the population? You're never going to get economic growth this way. In fact, Stiglitz just did a piece with Martin Gussman, and he says this: but Promesa is bringing more problems than solutions. Recently, the board, seemingly lacking both any understanding of basic economics and democratic accountability to provide checks against its incompetence, published its demands for the next fiscal year. The board actually predicted that its proposals would turn Puerto Rico's recession into a depression of a magnitude seldom seen anywhere, a 16.2% decline in the GNP in the next fiscal year, and further decline the year after that, which is comparable to the experience of countries undergoing civil wars or that of crisis-ridden Venezuela. That is because the board's plan gives priority to the island's creditors. It arbitrarily defines a minimum that must be paid to them in the short run and forces the government to do whatever it takes to reach that goal, even if it means devastating the local economy. That's Stiglitz just a couple of weeks ago. So the control board is not only saying the bondholders have to get less money, but that even the minimum amount of money that they believe the bondholders must get will trigger such deep cuts that it will throw Puerto Rico into a depression. What kind of a solution is that? What kind of a solution is that you're saying it's going to have to get a lot worse? And that the bondholders are going to be shaken over the fact that they're going to take 30 cents on the dollar or 25 cents on the dollar for their debt. The simple reality is that Garcia Padilla was right from the beginning, that the debt is not payable. Any attempt within the current economic structures to both pay even a small portion of that debt and to deal with stimulating economic growth in the United States within the confines of the existing structure cannot succeed. It cannot succeed. So that is the reality that I think that is facing the leaders of this country. And I think the issue then is how does this relate overall to the situation in the United States and the overall economic crisis? As I said, I've been dealing a lot now with trying to understand the situation of how neoliberalism has affected the cities of America. And when you talk about the cities of America, you're basically talking black and brown folks, right? Admittedly, there is still considerable debate among urban scholars on the meaning of neoliberalism or whether it is even appropriate in describing local city politics. Here I use the term not as a theoretical abstraction, but to outline a specific political economic project by which capital seeks greater profit through privatizing government services, appropriating major portions of the public commons, curtailing democratic accountability by public officials, and peddling increasing amounts of debts, all in the name of more efficient governance. The victory of the de Blasio coalition in New York City, I argued, represented the maturing of a new grassroots urban political revolt in America. It was an early indicator of what 2 years later would become known as the Bernie Sanders phenomenon. Huge swaths of voters rallying behind a crusade against income inequality and roundly rejecting a conservative free market worldview that has dominated American urban policy for nearly the past 50 years. No longer could the growing chasm between the ultra-rich and the rest of the country be ignored in the post-Great Recession, post-Occupy world. By 2012, the nation's wealth inequality was nearly as high as in 1929 before the Great Depression, and it was 3 times greater than it had been in the 1970s. Leaders of the new movement share a starkly different vision of how cities should be governed in the 21st century, how our streets, parks, schools, and public safety services should be utilized, how our zoning, land use, and local tax policies fashioned, how we define the nature of the public interest at a time when cities have become more economically more unequal economically, yet more racially and ethnically diverse than ever. These are crucial issues for modern civilization, given that more than half of Earth's 7 billion people now reside in cities. Over the next 20 years, another 3 billion are expected to leave the countryside, at which point 70% of humanity will be urbanized. The modern city, after all, has always held the promise of an easier and more enjoyable life, of greater opportunity and a more diverse social and cultural exchange of a more democratic environment. Nonetheless, conservative politicians too often regard that promise as a threat. As the Center for Popular Democracy, a think tank that helped spur this urban movement, noted recently, the American right basically hates cities. Its politicians always run against cities. They demonize their residents. They deny them resources once in office, and they dilute their vote through the crackling and packaging of techniques of gerrymandering election districts. This is especially true of the current US president. Quote, "Our inner cities are a disaster," Donald Trump declared in a campaign debate in 2016. Quote, "You get shot walking to the store, they have no education, they have no jobs," unquote. Trump deliberately courted white conservative voters in rural counties and small town America during his presidential campaign, asserts writer Will Wilkinson, by tracing their economic decline and their fading cultural cachet to the same cause: traitorous coastal elites who sold their jobs to the Chinese while allowing American cities to become dystopian Babels rife with dark-skinned danger, Mexican rapists, Muslim terrorists, inner cities plagued by black violence. He did so despite the fact, as Wilkinson noted, that the American metropolis is more peaceful and prosperous than it has been in decades. And even though FBI crime data show that so-called sanctuary cities that welcome immigrants have lower crime rates than comparable non-sanctuary cities. Little wonder that the vision espoused by these new urban progressive leaders depends less on the centralized dictates from Washington and where Congress and the White House are in the grip of blatantly anti-urban forces and ultranationalists, and less on local bankers, real estate developers, and other commercial interests want, less on privatizing public space or on siphoning off tax revenues for sports stadiums, civic centers, market rate housing, those grandiose projects often spearheaded by semi-public authorities that cede minimal power to local elected officials. Indeed, the rebel leaders pursue economic growth through a far different model, one that aims to address the most pressing needs of a city's increasingly diverse working masses. They pursue living wage, paid sick and family leave, subsidies for affordable housing, community oversight of policing, and minimal requirements for city contractors to employ local residents. They regard development that is environmentally sustainable as essential to the future of their cities. They demand maximum control over local decisions and budgets and are willing to be held accountable by neighborhood activists. So the anti-immigrant movement at the national level in the United States is on a collision course with the sanctuary cities. There is going to be a continuing legal, political, and a battle in the streets between the New Yorks and the Californias, and Martin Walsh in Boston declaring Boston a sanctuary city, and Bill Peduto in Pittsburgh declaring Pittsburgh a sanctuary city, and the Trump administration and the Congress that's saying we're going to cut your funds off, we're going to kneecap you if you dare continue to defy the federal government. So we're heading toward a period of collision between local governments and the federal government over the issue of immigration policy. And the reality is you cannot expect a Trump administration and a Congress that is anti-Mexican, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-African American to be predisposed to coming up with a better solution for Puerto Rico than what was crafted in the previous Congress. So that's the problem that we face, how to fashion a solution. I went to a meeting that was held in July in Philadelphia by this think it was called by the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. It was supposedly a Puerto Rican agenda, an attempt to pull together Puerto Rican leaders from around the country to try to figure out what does the diaspora do? What can it do to help in this crisis? That meeting left much to be desired. First of all, it was an invitation-only meeting, you know, and it wasn't even I even found out about it kind of late, but I managed to get invited in. And I'm supposed to be a journalist and knows this stuff, you know. And but it was an invitation-only meeting, 200, you know, political leaders from around the country. But when it came to the issue of what position do you take vis-a-vis Promesa itself, there was a big, strong current that did not want to oppose Promesa. Part of the problem was that, you know, our political leaders, our elected officials in Congress, and I don't know how many of you follow the debates in the Senate and the House. The Senate and the House have never had such an extensive debate over what to do about Puerto Rico as they did in the creation of Promesa. So, I mean, I know all these folks, you know, Maria Velasquez is a good friend of mine, Joe Serrano is a good friend, Luis Gutierrez, all the people who were among the Puerto Rican leaders who were involved in the debates. They all had to take stands. They didn't agree. That's nothing new. And ultimately, even though Nydia is a very good friend of mine, and Joe's a very good friend of mine, I believe that they made wrong decisions in backing the Promesa law. They believed they had no choice. I understand that they were doing it out of their own sense of what's right and wrong, what's best at this particular time. But that doesn't mean, just because the leaders may differ, the civic societies, the populists, can have their own perspective and their own view about what needs to be done. And you can oppose Promesa while dealing with Promesa. And I think that, so that became a huge debate in this meeting. And of course, some of the agenda people didn't want the statehood people in, they didn't want the pro-independence people to be too loud or hijack the meeting. So in an effort to prevent dissent, they ended up creating a very narrow approach of the diaspora here in the United States to the issue. We've got to have a big tent. You have to have a big tent when you're dealing with big problems, and you have to work out the differences of opinion and perspective between people on how to resolve, and understand that sometimes you're not going to agree. That's the nature of democracy. Sometimes people don't agree. But I think that the diaspora in the United States can play a huge role in being able to fashion a solution where the key thing to me is protecting solutions that go in the direction of promoting greater sovereignty for Puerto Rico, not less. We all know that after all these years, Puerto Rico is a separate nation. It's hard to, it's also a colony. That's accepted now. There's no debate. That used to be, when I used to write that Puerto Rico was a colony in the newspaper, and my editors would always give me a hard time. They said, why are you saying it's supposed to be a commonwealth? I said, look, believe me, it's a colony. Now they don't give me a hard time anymore. Everyone knows that. Everyone accepts it now. You know, so, but the question is what to do about the colony. You know, how to resolve the situation. And as the topic of savage imperialism, as American imperialism increasingly is besieged, it does become more recalcitrant, less liberal in its approach to dealing with its subjects. So that the reality is we're going to confront a much more hostile government in Washington. And the issue is then how do the Puerto Ricans deal with that? Because there's no doubt that there are two nations. One is called Puerto Rico, the other one is called the United States. The question is, what will be their future relationship? What will be their future relationship at a time when the United States no longer really needs Puerto Rico? I mean, Wall Street was having a great time all this time, but now that game is up, right? So they don't need Puerto Rico for military bases. They don't need Puerto Rico for cheap labor. They don't need Puerto Rico as an example or beacon to Latin America. And they now, even the financial guiso that they had is gone. So now, what's the United States going to do? about Puerto Rico. Not so much what Puerto Rico is going to do, which I think is important because they can have a big say in pushing one way or another, but when is the United States going to recognize that this stuff is the existing structure is no longer viable? That's what Promesa and the crisis proved. The question is, what will be the structure that will replace it? And that's the work that we've got to do. So anyway, those are my scattered thoughts on all of this, and I hope it helps to get us all to a better place. Thank you.